So I ended up buying the Sony A6600, and to be honest, I'm kind of conflicted about it. I mean, if the Sony A6400 is one of the best values in mirrorless cameras with a used price of close to $700, then the A6600 at almost double that price at $1,400 might be one of the worst values in mirrorless cameras. So as I was uploading the video, I was going through and grabbing some links in order to add to the description, and I noticed that as of for Monday, this Green Monday, the A6600 is actually $200 off on both Amazon and B&H. I've put links down in the description below. If you can grab the A6600 at that price, I think that makes it much more compelling. So today I kind of want to talk about why I ended up picking up the A6600, why I think it makes sense for me and my workflow and kind of the other equipment that I have. And then because I've only had the camera for a couple of days now, got it at the beginning of the week, haven't really had a chance to shoot much with it. It's been kind of rainy in the greater Los Angeles area. I thought it might be fun to just do like a kind of a low light comparison between the A6600 and the Canon M6mkII, and then also maybe do a stabilization comparison. See if that IBIS that is one of the selling features for the A6600 over the A6400 and over competition like Fuji's X-T3 is worth paying that extra money for. Okay, so let's get into it. For me, I really want to use the Sony APS-C camera as a video camera, as a B camera to my Sony A7 III that I use as kind of my primary A camera for shooting these kind of videos. And setting aside the fact that, I already have a bunch of Sony lenses and I would want to obviously match the picture profiles or match the color and the look and feel between my A camera, my A7 III, and my B camera. Even setting that aside, all the other brands sort of have their disadvantages as well. Like I did a whole video comparing the A6400 with the Canon M6mkII and why ultimately I prefer the Sony system for video, even though I do like the Canon system for stills. Canon's full frame mirrorless has like a really nasty crop when you're shooting in 4K. Panasonic's always struggled with, autofocus, even though the GH5 is an amazing, incredible video camera. Again, if you're trying to shoot yourself, you need good autofocus. Although my understanding is that autofocus has been improved recently. So it might be, I'm actually kind of interested in taking another look at the GH5 at this point. And then Fuji's offering, like I mentioned, by almost every measure, something like the Fuji X-T3 is a better video camera than the Sony A6600. You get better colors, better bit rates, 4K, 60, all these kinds of features. But it doesn't have a flippy screen. People kind of say like, well, only vloggers need, the flippy screen. I'm not vlogging, but I'm shooting this YouTube video, and I'll tell you, it's a pain in the butt to try to frame yourself on a camera that doesn't have a flip screen. It was a couple years ago, I was evaluating getting the A6500 as a B camera to the A7 III, and I ended up passing on that because it didn't have the flip screen. And that's actually why I ended up picking up the Canon M6mkII, because I figured that could be my sort of video camera for when I'm on the go. And actually it's a blessing in disguise because I ended up loving the EFM, as I've talked about, the Canon APS-C mirrorless system for stills, even though the Canon M6mkII, I was never really satisfied with it as a video camera. So then when you add in the fact that I already have a bunch of Sony lenses because I've been shooting with this A7 III ever since it first came out, and I want to be able to match like the colors and the look and feel between the A and the B camera, that kind of makes it an obvious decision for me to choose a B camera from within Sony's APS-C lineup. Now, the question of whether to go with the A6400 or the A6600 is not so clear cut. It's one I actually struggled with quite a bit. And even though I spend or waste, depending on whether you're talking to me or my wife, tons of money on camera gear, like this one was actually pretty hard for me, like hard to justify. Is it really worth spending almost twice as much money to get that IBIS, to get that Z battery over the A6400? And ultimately I decided that for me it is, and the big selling point for me is the IBIS, to be honest. If the whole point of having a B camera is it's something you're taking out in the field, you just want to get some quick shots while you're out and about, you don't want to have to bring a gimbal and, or have your footage ruined because like it was super shaky. Now I get it. The IBIS on this camera is not very good, especially if you're walking. That it really can't seem to compensate for that shutter that you get when you're taking footsteps. But as you'll see when we get to the stabilization comparison later, when you're taking like pans and think about like how you would be shooting B-roll when you're on the go. You just have this video camera with you and you want to capture a bit of B-roll. It's actually pretty stable, much more so than, you know, if you had no stabilization at all. And then that allows you to use these great Sigma lenses like the Sigma 16mm 1.4. I love this lens. I love having that f1.4 aperture, and I really love that 24mm full frame equivalent focal length. So being able to, like, you know, run around with this, get some B-roll, have it be stable-ish, you know, certainly not nearly as good as some of the competition in terms of IBIS, but to me, that actually makes it worth the upgrade. And you know, one thing that I actually wasn't expecting to like as much as I do is this grip. It is like huge compared to the A6400, even compared to the M6 Mark II, which like I think has a really good grip. You know, it's really, really big by comparison. It really feels like the you know, the same grip that's in the Sony A7 III. And I guess that makes sense because it's the same battery that's in there, so you would probably have the same size grip around it. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I've only had the A6600 for a couple of days. It's been real rainy. It was busy this week, so I didn't get a chance to really shoot much with it. So I don't want to give sort of like a official review or even some first impressions of the camera beyond the reasons why I thought it was worth plunking down the $1,400 for it. But I did have the time to shoot a little low light comparison because, you know, this sensor has been low light tested to death at this point. I kind of thought it would be fun to do it as more of a comparison between the Sony A6600 and the Canon M6 Mark II. How does that old Sony 24 megapixel sensor compare to Canon's new 32 megapixel sensor? So let me show you the setup that we got going. So basically this is the rig. We've got the Canon M6 Mark II over here. We've got the Sony A6600 over here, both of which have the Sigma 16mm f1.4 lens. So that's one nice thing in this comparison. We're going to be shooting with the exact same lens on both cameras. We're going to be shooting them both wide open at f1.4. One other thing I should mention about our setup is I actually left the high ISO noise reduction on the Sony. I left it on normal. I did not turn it off. And the reason I did that is because if you look at the menu available on the M6 Mark II, there's only low, standard, and high. So since I couldn't turn it off completely on the M6 Mark II, I figured let's just both leave them sort of how they come from the factory in normal mode and do the comparison that way. And then just to kind of give us a baseline, because, you know, it's always hard to tell in these videos, like how dark is this room when I start bringing the lights down. I thought we should throw a Google Pixel 3 in the middle as just like a control. So our ultimate setup will kind of look like this. Canon M6 Mark II, Google Pixel 3, and then the Sony A6600. So let's go ahead and get into the test. We're in a controlled environment here. The single light source I have is the Aperture 120D Mark II. We can dial that down with the remote and raise up the ISO on each camera. All right, so this is 100 ISO, 200 ISO. This is how it looks at 200 ISO. Okay, this is 400 ISO. This is how it looks at 400 ISO. We got 400 ISO on each camera. Okay, here we are at 800 ISO. We've got 800 ISO on each camera. Be interesting to see how the Google Pixel is holding up at this point. It's starting to get pretty dark in this room. All right, here we are at 1600 ISO. We've got 1600 ISO on each camera. All right, we've got 3200 ISO, 3200 ISO on each camera. You know, one thing that's really nice about both of these cameras having the flip up screens is it's really easy for me to double check and make sure that I do have both cameras locked in sync in the same ISO. So, all right, now we're at 6400 ISO. It's starting to get really dark in this room. Like I have the kind of a mirror behind, the closet mirror behind here, and I can barely see myself in the mirror. It's so dark. I have a feeling that the Pixel is really starting to struggle. It'd be really interesting to see how noisy the Canon and the Sony are starting to get at this 6400 ISO. All right, here we are at 12,800 ISO, 12,800 ISO on each camera. And this really reaches the end of the tests. I can't get the Aperture 120D that I have here as our single light source to go any dimmer. At this point, if I take it one stop lower, then it turns off completely. So this is sort of the end of the test. So after looking at the footage, you know, I was really impressed. Both cameras looked great. It's incredible how well they looked given how dark the room is. Even though maybe there's a little bit more noise in the Canon, I kind of thought that it did better in terms of preserving the natural colors. So it's a little bit of a give and take, but both, as you can see, compared really well to the cell phone. I mean, admittedly, there's some fast glass on each of these cameras, but if you have access to either of these cameras or any of the Sony APS-C series, the 6600 series, it's definitely worth bringing the camera, if you know you're going to be shooting in a low light situation, over the cell phone that you're probably already going to have in your pocket. And since we already have this rig set up and the IBIS is one of the main selling features inside the A6600, I thought it'd be good to take this rig outside and do a little stabilization test. Now in all of the sort of preview videos that I saw on the A6600, it's pretty obvious that the IBIS when you're walking is terrible, and that's sort of my expectation. But it will be interesting to see how it compares to the electronic image stabilization that you have in the M6 Mark II. And to give us a nice baseline, we'll go ahead and start out by setting the digital image stabilization on the M6 Mark II to disabled. Okay, we got both cameras set to 1/60th of a second shutter speed, shooting in 4K, 30 frames per second, both locked in an f4 100 ISO, both with the Sigma 16mm f1.4 lens. Here's what a little walking test looks like. Let's do a little pan. Okay, now let's turn on steady shot in the M6 Mark II. All right, this is with regular image stabilization on the M6 Mark II. Let's do a little bit of a pan. Okay, that's enhanced image stabilization on the M6 Mark II. The walking test. And now a little pan. Okay, here's what it looks like with the camera turned around. We have no image stabilization on the M6 Mark II at this time. We got the IBIS going on the Sony A6600. The reason the Sony looks a little bit more cropped in, even though it only has a 1.5 times crop, whereas the Canon has a 1.6 times crop, is because we're shooting in 30 frames per second, which actually adds an additional 1.2 times crop when you're in 4K on the Sony that isn't present on the Canon. Of course, if we were shooting this in 24 frames per second, then the Sony would actually look a little bit wider. Okay, now we have regular image stabilization on the Canon, and of course we've got just the in-body IBIS on the Sony. So now that looks to be about an equivalent focal length. Got the rig held at about arm's length here. So this is with the enhanced image stabilization on the Canon. So that's creating a little bit more of a crop. I have my arm pretty much fully extended right now. Okay, I'm back from the stabilization test. I've looked at the footage. It's interesting. The A6600, just as disappointing as I expected when I'm walking, but certainly does better than the A6400. And then where I was actually really impressed with the Sony was those panning shots. And that's kind of what I talked about earlier on in the video. Like if you can capture some stable B-roll footage, get your pans, get some, like close-up shots, things like that, and you don't have those jitters in there because the IBIS, even if it can't do a good job while you're walking down the street, at least it can allow you to, while you're on the go, grab a little bit of B-roll that ends up looking nice without the need of a gimbal. That's why I upgraded. That to me is what made the A6600 worthwhile. I'm going to be doing some more tests with it. I can't wait to actually take it out and do some real shooting with it. One video that I know I'm going to do that I'm going to be working on right after this is comparing this with the Sony A7 III, kind of doing a full frame APS-C comparison while also, maybe testing how does the in-body image stabilization in the A7 III full frame compare with that in the A6600. So if you want to see that video, make sure you subscribe. If you want me to test particular things about the A6600 or in the A6600 in comparison with the A7 III, leave a comment down below. I read all of the comments that get left on the videos, so I'll definitely try to test anything that's suggested. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. See you next time. Bye.